here we are again for the Unwritten Earth Symposium podcast.
Yes, I'm here with my good friend Nathan Palef. We're here to talk about tabletop role-playing game design. I'm sorry, I did role-playing game design. I'm grabbing that ground. if I was gonna have something pithy there and I didn't. I was hoping I'd be like, it's if it's role-playing, it's tabletop. Otherwise, it's just sparkling character classes.
It's only role-playing if it's from the tabletop region of France. Otherwise, it's just sparkling XP progression.
Exactly.
Yeah, something like that. So yes, it's Unwritten Earth Symposium. I'm Nathan Paletta. Epi already told you that, which means that I tell you that I'm here with my good friend Epidiah Ravishal. And we still don't really know how to begin this show, which is fine. Mm-hmm. It's all a big journey of discovery. That's really what we're here to do.
Play to find out.
I'm absolutely sure that there are many podcasts that have a pithy, play to find out mission statement that they state at the top of the podcast in a more organized fashion.
So here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, we usually have a bit of more of a gap between our episodes.
But from our perspective, from your perspective, this should be exactly the same. But
but for some travel-y things later this month, we're trying to make sure that we do not interrupt our episodes for you. So I feel like we are still talking about the same things that we did last time, but we also intentionally were like, next time we're going to talk about the same things we talked about.
Yes.
Just more. Where do you want to start?
Let's do our homework.
Let's start with our homework. Okay, we'll start with our vegetables.
Got to get this homework out of the way.
So it has been a couple episodes since we assigned this homework, but you can hear our original plan right now. How about this? What if it's more goal-oriented? Like, let's bring a game that you would use as someone's first game.
Oh, that's interesting.
This is what I think is a good introduction into playing these kinds of games.
Let's make it concrete. Bring a game that you would make your mom's first game.
Okay. Yes.
Will this work? Is this a possibility, or is this?
Oh yeah, no, it's a possibility. That's not one of your own games.
No. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That is definitely the danger zone there. Some game on your shelf that you did not write, that I did not write.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we all know that the first game you would play with your mom is. I was trying to think of like some obscure game.
Is Dread.
Dread. Yeah, it's Dread. Everyone's gonna teach their mom Dread.
And we're back.
All right. Well, this is a challenging one.
It was a challenging one in kind of a strange way. Epi, you did threaten/promise to talk to your mom. Did that end up happening?
Not yet. I just haven't had a chance to. I mean, I talked to my mom, but obviously
not
talked about other things. Yeah. Shall I go first? Should I reveal the game that I chose? Well, I don't know if we got all of the constraints. That's
foreshadowing.
That's the motif. But very specifically, we're not allowed to use our own games or each other's games because we're avoiding that in our homework anyway. So why not?
We already know the arcane gems that lie within our own work. Yeah. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it.
Exactly. So I had a big problem, right? Because I was sitting here thinking, my mom. She enjoys board games, right? There's a cultural thing in our family where my mom will go through a board game and be like, "What? How does this work? Now, am I doing this right?" And then she'll win.
Yeah.
Every time. Well, not every time, but like she's a little bit of a game sharp, I guess, is what, instead of just a card sharp. I'm not even sure if she's aware of it, but anyways. Conceptually, she gets a board game. She understands a board game. So I thought I'd like to go board game. Also, she very much enjoys, as most of us do, a good cozy mystery. Now, we both know a game that combines the two of those, but it's one of yours. And I cannot use that, right?
Yeah,
like I cannot use one more thing, though I would have. So I sat and thought about it, looking through my collection, and I found a game, and I'm going to say that this is a controversial choice.
Okay.
This is...
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Zombie Cinema by Arrow Man, there was a day and time when I knew how to pronounce his last name. Tuven?
Toiven?
Toivonen?
It's come up before because we mentioned the solar system that he
yes
also published. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Zombie Cinema came out in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So it is it's old now, right? We're all old now.
It was a go-to convention convention favorite for a while because it's like quick to, well, I imagine for many of the reasons that you are selecting it.
Yes. Yeah, it had a hot minute in the sun. So Zombie Cinema is you don't have a GM. Everyone plays a character in a zombie horror film. Now, that is going to be a very hard sell with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
She is not going to appreciate zombie horror film, but I'm willing to risk it because I think from the distance of a role-playing game where she doesn't have to actually witness the gore effects or anything like that, she may actually appreciate the genre somewhat. Zombie Cinema comes in a old VHS case, which is great. One of those clamshell cases. It has a board. The board is not, I was going to say it's not necessary. It's kind of it's a neat thing, but you're not doing much. You're just moving on a straight line in it. The board doesn't present it as a straight line, but it is just step here to here. I'll talk about the board in a second. But okay, so you play zombie survivors, and everyone has a pawn for their character, and they all have a die with a color that matches their pawn. That's actually important. And then I'm basically going to tell you how to play this game. There's a starting place on the board where the characters start. There's a starting place on the board where the zombies start, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces away. And then there's an escape, and everyone's kind of heading towards the escape. It's like a number line. Mm-hmm. So it's like zombies start on 0, humans start on 5, escape is at 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Escape is at 9. Each space has some I'm going to have a little trouble figuring out what the arcane gem is other than the game itself, because there's a lot of good stuff in here. Each space on the board tells you about the current zombie situation. Mm-hmm. So as the zombies progress up the board and they only go forward, they go from the first place where their zombies only appear indirectly. There's rumors, delusions in newscasts, for example, so people aren't sure if zombies actually exist or not. Then the next space is zombies are few and slow and easy to avoid or overcome, and you kind of progress. By the time they get to where the humans start, it says things like zombies can get everywhere, escape is the only option, organization fails. The zombie pawn is telling you how civilization is breaking down and how the zombies because at one point they appear to have new abilities, so there's wrenches that throw into the works. So you go around presenting scenes that you narrate until you get to a conflict. You can cut a scene without a conflict, but if you get to a conflict, you're going to present your side and somebody else is going to present or advocate for a different side. And then everyone's going to bid for which side they want to be a part of by adding their dice to that. Mm-hmm. I read this last week, so I apologize, but just give me a moment here, and I will explain how this works, because this conflict resolution is pretty neat. All the other players have the opportunity to either pass, so they don't want to be involved in this conflict of interest, ally, or support with their dice. And then those are two different options, allying and supporting. If you pass, you just hide your die. You're not involved in it. If you're an ally, you place your die next to the die you're allying with, and if you support, you place your die on top of the die you're supporting. Now, you may only pass if your character does not get involved in the conflict. So You're basically saying, I'm just not here. You may only ally if your character helps out the character of the player you ally with. So again, it's pretty straightforward. You may always support anybody in the conflict, regardless of whether your character does or supports anybody else. So support is the player supporting, not the character supporting, which is kind of neat, right? That's a thing. And so you don't even have to be in a scene to support.
And if you're in a scene, you can still pass, and you're kind of being like, I'm just watching, or like I'm running away or cowering or something.
Yeah. After all the players have passed, allied, or supported, the conflict participants roll their own dice, and any dice that support them, and the allies roll their own dice, and any dice that support them. So you can actually support an ally as I'm reading this.
Yeah.
That's neat. The highest individual die of this roll is called the high die. So basically, the person with the high die gets the narration things. So if you're throwing your support in instead of allying, you have no choice you have no option. You aren't able to get the high die because the person you're supporting is rolling your die.
Right. Yeah. You're giving them a better chance to get the high die.
Yes. If you're allying, you're supporting them, but you might end up being the one doing the narrating. Right. And then the other important thing to do here is if you're on the winning side, you get to advance your pawn one space towards escape to the end of that timeline. And if you're on the losing side, your pawn goes one space towards the zombies as they're coming up behind you. And if you support it or you pass, your pawn doesn't move. So that's the other thing. Is like when you support someone, you're not risking your pawn, but you're not giving your pawn an opportunity to advance.
It's actually it's a hard line between character doing stuff for your character or doing stuff for like the story, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's nice. And then like people don't die until the zombie catches up to them, and then the zombies eat them. Like that's the way that goes. There's more to this. It's not a lot more. The rules are front and back of a
cassette insert.
Yeah, cassette insert. Yeah, basically. It's not a lot of rules, but there are some neat things. There's ways to like do sacrifices to move other people forward and things like that.
If you're eaten by zombies, what happens as a player?
Characterless players. When a player character escapes or dies, he continues in the game normally, except he does not advocate for the special character. Oh, does not advocate for a specific character. Sorry. One of the things about this game is lovely, but and I'm going to just show this to Nathan.
Yep.
It is small text on a low contrast with the background. And I probably had no trouble with this
in 2008.
17 years ago, but now my eyeballs aren't that great. When a characterless player is the active player, they may call for a conflict against the zombies. So that's it. Like if you don't have it, you still can do the whole thing about calling conflicts, but you're doing it with the zombies. You're representing the zombies, basically, which is fun. There was like another thing. And character creation. Let me talk a little bit about why I think this would work with my mom.
Sure.
Number one.
Yeah.
The board is a great focus. It's nice to like see where you stand on the board. It's the stakes are evident in the physicality of the play, right? Like,
are you closer or farther away from the zombies?
Exactly. And every time that zombie moves up, everyone's like, "Ooh!" I didn't talk about what causes the zombies to move up, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I think it might just be if there's a tie. If there's a tie between the dice on the winning side, have the tied players co-narrate. Instead of moving pawns, advance the zombie pawn one space.
Gotcha.
So that's another dangerous thing. The more people that get involved,
the more chance that the high die will be tied.
Yeah. And so you end up with like, which is good. Fun. That feels like if the community is fighting about something, if it's two people fighting, fine. But if the whole community is fighting, then you put everyone at risk.
And everyone's playing one play. Like the zombies are like automated in this way. There's not like a GM zombie master or something. Zombie master.
Character creation is there's a deck of cards that are just three suits of things that are like like your vice, like you're weak-willed, or you naivete, or you have a dark past or something like that. Like what's going on with you right now during the like you're looking for loved ones, you're injured, or you have a place to go, or you think this is an opportunity. Like, hey, we can make some money here. And then like a little bit more like very specific. You're an adolescent, or you're a middle class professional, or you're a police officer, or that kind of thing.
More like identity kind of.
Yeah. So you draw a card from each deck, and you make a character out of that. This part, I will say, just flipping through them right now because I don't know why, but I did not actually look at these while I was doing my homework because I was like, oh yeah, there's a deck of cards, and they, it's like that thing. Like I get that concept.
Yeah, deck of cards for making characters, sure.
Like, and then right away talking about playing this with my mom, one of them is Lust or Greed, and I'm like, I might tailor this deck a little bit before playing with my mom. Sure. That's all I'm saying. But that's fine. That's that's fun.
That's one of the wonderful things about decks of cards.
Yeah, and in fact, we could even pretty easily hack our own deck, like at the beginning, much like someone might do in another board game, role playing game, where you just as a group come up with these things, and then.
Well, I think part of the reason it was like a good like one shotty thing was like. You draw your 3 cards. All right, here's my character. The situation is the zombies. Let's go. Right, like that's the benefit of the model. Is that like you start playing just the way that you start like watching a movie, right? It's like, all right, we just met 3 characters and we know they're zombies, and let's just see what happens. Yeah.
Like there's not a whole lot more we have to do about setting. I think it specifically says you can set it anytime, anywhen, but it makes sense to set it now where you are.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and that does make sense. Like it just quick and go. So like I said before, I like that the board game aspect of it would make it very accessible to my mom. There's a very small amount of rules that not only is there not a lot of rules to have to convey to someone, but also that small amount of rules doesn't depend on a shared understanding of what a role-playing game is to do it.
Now that we've started playing, these are your options. And then like you're like, I want to do this. You're like, okay, here's the rule for that.
Exactly.
And so that's a very like board game-ish model.
There's none of these like hidden implicit rules that we often use to like make games work, especially smaller and smaller games. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to just say, like, if you've got a culture of play and you're writing to that culture of play, 100% depend on that if you want. Like that's a choice, but it is a choice. It's a thing you're deciding to do. This game will tell you everything you need to do. The most it will sort of wave its hand is like, it'll say, here's free narration where you just kind of come up with whatever you want. And in those situations, you kind of need an experienced player to like, because oftentimes when you're like, you can come up with whatever you want, and then somebody's like, okay, an alien spacecraft lands and welcomes us aboard, and other people are like, that I don't know why that feels illegal, but that feels illegal.
Right. And that doesn't feel right.
So, negotiating that becomes a
thing. And again, I think like culture of play, like this is coming out of a space where the thing that we all are really good at is like coming up with something to say in a scene, right? Like, here's what I want to see happen, or here's what my character does.
Yeah.
That's something that is a lot of games. I mean, from then and now. All right. And, when you're in the scene, narrate what your character's doing. Yeah. As game nerds, that has a specific sphere of stuff that we tend to stay within.
Yeah. But that actually brings up kind of another reason why I think this would be fun with my mom, which is I have run zombie scenarios at conventions for, I would say, probably thousands of people. Like, not all at once, obviously, but like, demoing Dread, running a zombie game is the easiest way to get people on board at a noisy convention center full of other people.
Sure.
That does nothing but help the horror atmosphere to begin with. And also it's just like everyone who's going to meet me at that convention who's interested in a horror game knows what a zombie apocalypse film is like. And so it's just like, bam, we're on now. My mom does not care for zombie horror films in general, zombie films probably even more particular than. So getting her take on this, what would she come up with for these conflicts? Like, I want to know. That's intriguing to me. That's very exciting. And like, so that's another reason why I'm like, this, I think would be a fun pick to teach role-playing games to my mother.
Cool. do you have a specific arcane gym to articulate out of that? Or is it kind of more like this whole game?
This whole game. It's a little bit like this whole game, but I guess I think the real arcane gem here, there's a lot of good stuff in here, but like the one I would highlight is precisely what we were talking about with the difference between allying and supporting being the hard difference between what the character's doing and where the player interest is. Like that is neat. Also, this isn't necessary for Arcane Gem, but like it feels nicely portable. Like if you think about that, you can look at other games and go, it also helps. There's a little bit of alibi there, right? Like a lot of zombie movie characters fall into that horror trope of like they're a bad person and you're waiting for them to get eaten by the zombie, right? And sometimes that's hard to play at the table. Sometimes that's fun. And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't know. I don't really like, for instance, it might be difficult for my mom to do that. Or we might find a side of her that we don't want to know about. And it's super easy for her to play the jerk or whatever. But that gives you a little bit of an alibi there. You separate the player from the character in a very mechanical way and say like, oh no, my character is totally advocating for us leaving the injured behind, but I'm the player, so I'm supporting bringing the injured people along with us. You know, like my character's a jerk, but my die is
right, but I'm interested in the story, or like I want to see my character get what's coming to them. So I'm going to advocate as a player for something that's against my character's interest. Yeah.
And in this game, you then have to make the decision of where your die goes, like whether you're going to ally with the wrong side or whether you're going to support the correct side. But you could certainly, in another game where you take this arcane gem and work it a different way, have you play both sides. It'd be really interesting to see someone do that, and I'm sure somebody has. And it'd be interesting if it's very asymmetrical too. Well, it is asymmetrical in this as well, because you don't risk your character if you support. But yeah,
cool.
Neat little gem. It'd been a long time since I've thought about this game, and I remember that feeling at the convention where it was like, we can play some zombie cinema right now if you want.
Yeah.
it was very much like you sat down with some people, you're talking for a bit, the conversation lulls, and then you're like, hey, we don't have
slide it across the table.
Yeah, just slide it across the table.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah.
So I started in a similar place. I'll leave it to the listener to determine whether I did a great job with my homework. I left it till the last minute, and then I crammed right before the show.
I want to say that is legit. And also, like, I think it's fun. Obviously the goal here is just for us to find something in our collection and present it. So like, oh no, it's the very last minute. You have to figure something out.
Yeah. Still
produces something interesting, right? Like that's yeah.
Yeah. Like I was intending to do a little more robust of a search or of a look see. And then I just got like caught up with other stuff. And then like going to bed last night, I was like, oh, right. I need to do this. I went into my mind palace. I was like, okay, what can I visualize that's on my shelf that I can get up in the morning and go get, right? So I started thinking about it before I went to bed. And I started in a similar place. My mom is into mystery stuff for sure. The reason I got into Columbo was watching Columbo with her when we'd be on like a trip and find it on cable or something, and she's like, Columbo, and so there's that. But she's also into like crime thrillers and stuff like that. There's a whole genre of like depressing Norwegian police dramas that I think she's kind of into. I know she's been watching Slow Horses, which is like a spy, drama thing that people have been very into. I don't know much about it, but it's apparently very good. I've
heard of it.
Anyway, so I'm starting in that place. Also, we just resurfaced Clue as a family. This latest Christmas, there's a like classic edition reissue of Clue. Or Cluedo for our British friends. I forget exactly when it came out, but it's the box I remember as a kid. It's the characters that are in the movie, if you will. It's Mrs. Peacock and Professor Plum. Like they've done more modern versions, right? That have like less heteronormative characters and like stuff like that. But they reissued this like classic edition, with all the original artwork and stuff. And so anyway, she got that, and we actually busted it out at Christmas, and I got to play Clue, where Simone was on my team.
Oh, fun! And
then me and Liz and my mom played, and my mom won. So
as moms do,
Anyway, so I'm in that space too. So I went through my shelf, and I have this game that I have not yet played, and I think I skimmed when I first got it, but I was definitely revisiting for this. This is a 2020 coming from a Kickstarter project for a detective game called Gray Cells.
Oh, this looks very familiar to me.
It was on Kickstarter. It's by Bogdan Konstantinescu is the creator. The company is Dapper Fish Designs. I will put a link in the show notes. And it is coming from the Poirot side of all this stuff. It's called Gray Cells, referring to the little gray cells. It has like a deco, kind of visual style, etc. So I was like, okay, Poirot, that's a good place to start. So skimming the game, I think I could play this with my mom. I specifically could run this for my mom to play. So this is like the opposite side of what you're looking at with like the board gamey thing, and like everyone able to kind of like be on like at the same level of participation.
Right. You would be more facilitating.
Yeah, no, this is like it has a very traditional GM player split. It says it's for 3 to 4, but in a different place in the book, it says it's for 2 to 4, and like there's no reason you couldn't run it. Based on my reading, there's no reason you couldn't run it one-on-one. And it's a mystery game. It's a bit of a toolkit game where it gives you a bunch of different tools to put together into here's the kind of mystery story we want to do. So like it's kind of covering the gamut of like cozy mystery to like police homicide, life on the street, like
Ooh.
Henry just sat on his squeaky bone. What's up, buddy?
That's good.
He just surprised himself. Usually leaves that as a trap for me.
That's good stuff.
So it's a game where the GM comes up with the crime and figures out the parameters of the mystery, and then the investigators play through discovering things and putting together clues and coming to some resolution. It's not deterministic, so it is a like you can potentially like not solve the case.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure how satisfying that is, but it is like in there as an option. And also it's kind of like with the implication of like, okay, so then the next time you play, now this criminal, this villain is back.
Right. You get a chance.
Yeah. So it's more like Sherlockian, like you didn't get him this time kind of thing. So the way that I think it's appropriate to play with my mom or any other mom, any mom, but anyone else who's not like a game nerd, right, is that I have those skills to be like, okay, we're playing this game.
Right.
You do this, I do this, right? Like, because I have that background, I can do the facilitation of like, here's your character sheet. Here's the things that you need to know. And like, characters aren't super complicated. There's like some stats. They tell you what you can do. You have some special stuff for like your character. It's archetype based. There's a lot of Apocalypse World, Powered by the Apocalypse stuff in here, but it's not, at least it's not by name Powered by the Apocalypse, but there's a lot of like that kind of structure in here. So like you pick like kind of a character template, and that gives you some sets of stats. And then you're basically picking off of lists for things, etc. And then in play, it doesn't have like formal scene structure. So like in one more thing, you do like, I'm going to do an investigation scene, or I'm going to do a interrogation scene, right? This is more, again, classic, like, all right, what do you do? Where do you go? Right.
Yeah.
But the thing that kind of structures play is that as the characters do things, make rolls, and, advance their agenda, when they discover evidence that turns into a point. There's evidence points. Those both formalize like, yes, you are on the right track, right? Like, oh, you talk to this person, he tells you this thing, you have an evidence point. So like now everyone at the table is like, oh, okay, that's important. That's important, right?
Yeah.
So it formalizes that, which is nice. It is the currency you use to conduct interrogations. So the interrogations are a special kind of roll, and instead of rolling stats, you are rolling with however many evidence points you spend on it. You can kind of game around like, we need to build up enough evidence so that we're gonna really gonna do well on the interrogation roll, because the interrogation roll gives you a couple things that like other kinds of rolls don't give you.
That's neat. Yeah.
And then at the end of the story, or the end of the game, so the game is tracked. There's I think it's called the villain track. There is a set, basically number of scenes for the game to go. Not every scene you play checks off on the track, but some of them check on 2, so there's a little bit of an economy there that the GM keeps track of. Anyway, when you get to the end of that, and you find out you either solve the case or you don't, and all the evidence points that you've accumulated turn into your experience, whether you spent them or not. So gaining lots of evidence during the story.
That's good.
Yeah, it sets you up, and then you spend it on getting new skills and like whatever. So that stuff's really nice, and I think that's really like a nice concrete flag for play.
Yeah, as an organizing principle, it gets people to. There's a good word for this. It's a strong attractor.
Yeah.
Right. Like you see it and you're like, oh, that's what I should do. That's how I gain points. That's how I win. Exactly. For lack of a better term.
Yeah. It's like, and they are always good, and thematically you're gaining evidence, and like narratively that's because I, as the GM, reveal a piece of evidence, and it has a good like principle where it's like the GM never lies. The characters lie, but the GM never lies. So when you're like giving an evidence point, that is always the truth. Yeah.
That's
nice.
Good. I like that.
I definitely think it's a game where you probably spend those first couple scenes kind of fumbling around and figuring out like, all right, what are we doing here? Like, what's the deal with our characters? Where do we go? And then once you lock into a direction, it probably goes like, boom, boom, boom. It actually mostly makes me think of the other British detective show. It's the place where there's way too many murders. It's named after a place.
Midsummer Murders?
Yes, Midsummer Murders. The theming is Poirot, but it's really Midsummer Murders to me, because your villain has an agenda. So it's like they can potentially like kill again, right? Or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Or I mean, Poirot, like Murder on the, Nile, like there's like crimes that happen on the boat.
In succession. Yeah,
in succession. So it's kind of like that model where it's like you are trying to find stuff out, and it's a bit of a race against time.
Yeah.
Because if you go through too many scenes without changing what the villain is going to do, then they will commit their next crime.
Right.
So it's not really a Columbo game. It specifically is not a Columbo game, actually, which is kind of funny.
Unless it's that one episode.
Last Salute to the Commodore, unless it's that one.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. Anyway.
That's a wild episode.
Yeah. So that's all good stuff. So that's all like kind of the stuff where I'm like, yeah, I could play this with my mom. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
And then looking at it specifically for Arcane Gems, I mean, I like the evidence point thing. Like that's very nice. That's very juicy. But it also has this structure of tags for things, which again is not uncommon. But there's 2 places where I think that's like really, really strong and pointed. And I'm like, oh, that's really nice. One is that every character, so player characters, and also they're called persons of interest, but like named characters, important NPCs.
Yeah, it's good flavor text to call them persons of interest.
Has a price and a threat. So in order for me to get your character to do something, your character has a carrot and a stick, right?
Yeah.
Like it has a price, which is something that I can offer you to manipulate you into what I want. And you have a threat, which is I can put pressure on you by threatening this.
Right.
And then there's a list of those that you choose from, and they can work for either. So like on the list are things like money, right? So like your price can be like, you will take money to do things. So that's when money is your price. If money is your threat, it would be like, okay, well, I can put a hold on your bank account and you can't, pay your rent. Right. And so now I'm threatening you through that avenue. Money, fame, power, like there's a list of things that you pick, but I think that's a really, like, if I'm making a person of interest, right? I'm like, okay, what do they need to do for the story? And then I pick their price and their threat, and now I know what their deal is. So that's a nice structure for that. And then the other thing is that because it is multi-genre within the mystery story, it has a breakdown of the specific genres that you can play in with tags, and I found it really well organized. So I will give you an example. Let's see. So if you're going to play a cozy mystery, right, cozy genre, your investigators are amateurs, social, civilians. And then those have little breakdowns. So like amateurs, rarely professionals, you're a talented but ordinary person, etc. Cases are investigated by talking to people, social. You're civilians. You don't have real authority, but the investigators, you may be able to get a place the police come, right? So the investigators are amateurs, you're social, you're civilians. The world is clean, small, and connected. The world is not graphic and dangerous. So those are
the cozy kind of,
And again, these have a little paragraph, for each of these.
Oh, that's good. I like this. This is a nice way to handle this, I think.
The crimes are personal, premeditated, and private. Personal slights. They're rarely a crime of passion. It's usually a result of festering discontent and cold calculation. And they're private. It's about secrets and stuff like that. Contrast this with a hard-boiled adventure. Instead of being amateurs, social, civilians, your investigators are jaded, scrupulous, scraping by, and disliked. Right. Instead of the world being clean, small, and connected, the world is corrupt, seedy, and threatening. Instead of a world that is not graphic and dangerous, the hard-boiled world is one that is not forgiving and grateful. And instead of crimes being personal, premeditated, and private, crimes are messy, monetary, and covered, in that there's a support network of, like, criminals are all overlapping with each other and have interests within themselves. So there's always a cover up, right? So and there's it breaks out like 5 or 6 genres in this manner.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I found that to be really cool. I like the is and is not. Is really nice. These aren't menus. Like these are definitional. So it's not like these are tags that are used to like mix and match, but you could imagine some kind of situation where you have a bunch of these things and you can kind of mix and match them. It does say to make a villain stand out, like they come from one of these genres and your investigators are a different genre, right? That kind of thing. That's a really functional way for me to be like, okay, here's the boundaries of what our game is about and what I'm expecting you to bring to the game.
It's nice that they're not binary in that, like, you're not saying, is the world clean or is it dirty?
Yeah.
Instead of saying, here's the question and we're trying to decide which side of the question we're on, they're saying, here are the things that are important about this. Yeah, which is neat. I dig it. I dig it.
So I like that a lot.
It's got the gray cells moving.
The campaign, I guess did pretty well. I don't remember the details, but what I ended up getting in the mail was this, and then
the Yield Kickstarter.
Yeah. And then 3
collateral.
3 expansions basically. There's Crimes in Chrome sci-fi.
Oh, yeah.
Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Thing. Suspects and Sorcery to bring it into Yieldy times. And the Mythos Mysteries to bring it into, Cthulhu-ish stuff.
Cosmic horror
things. So I did not break into those. For my mom, the basic one would be the way to go. So Gray Cells.
This is good. It's got me thinking. I'm like, oh, I could have fun running that game.
Yeah, it's a high GM lift game because it's like you need to figure out the crime.
Yeah,
you do all the world building stuff. But that's fun. So
yeah. I have a particular group where this would hit well So that's why, like, my brain is like, oh, this might work with this group.
Yeah, it addresses the mysteries are hard to do in RPGs by being like, yeah, they are. You kind of have to figure it out. But here's like a bunch of tools for how to figure it out.
Yeah. And so the arcane gems, we don't have to keep going over it, but I'm trying to remember.
No, so I'd say my arcane gem specifically would be that, the evidence point thing.
Yes.
Because I think that's something you could use for lots of different purposes. But it works really well for something like a mystery or like problem solving kind of setup. And then this way of articulating genre.
Yeah, with the tags.
And or like articulating characters with picking from a menu of tags for what their deal is. Specifically the levers on them, I think is interesting. I mean, for this game, it's particularly, appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there we go.
So we should assign new homework. We've gotten a couple suggestions in the Discord. Oh, yeah. We should talk about the Discord, too.
What we've received so far require a little bit of setup. I mean, I think they're good ideas. Like they're fun ideas, but they require a little bit of like pre-choice organizing.
Yeah. All right.
Which I have not done. But I had a thought about another spur of the moment homework.
Sure,
and then we can go into one of these the next time we have a little more of a stretch between recordings. A game that either one that you currently or one upon looking through things jumps out at you. A game that you want someone else to run for you.
I can see where your motivation comes from here. Yeah. All right. Do you have more? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
I mean, I was kind of thinking in like a convention setting, like kind of the idea of like,
right.
Like you're presented with some choices and one of them you're like, I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, that's something I really want to play. But like someone else is bringing it to you.
Yes. All right. That's good. That is good.
You're at the Games on Demand and you're looking at the menus. Which one of them jumps out at you?
But importantly, it's all games through all time and not like, well, I mean, I guess that is what happens at Games on Demand. All right, that's good.
Yeah, and that can be either shelf or
Cyborg.
If you could look at your Cyborg.
I'll look at I do have Cyborg Commando, and that might
be it. Yeah, and I think, something that you're not already familiar with, etc.
That's okay, good. I'm excited about that. Let's talk about our Discord.
Yes.
I am a little ashamed at our... No, I'm kidding. That's the opposite of what I want to say. So Nathan and I did a little experiment last time. We decided that we would do a little co-working on the Discord.
Mm-hmm.
We're on 2 different coasts. A lot of our time spent in synchronous communication is recorded for a podcast. I would say the majority of our time in synchronous communication is recorded for the podcast. We do have like a roughly weekly meeting, but that's often just like paperworky stuff most of the time. We bounce ideas off each other or whatever. But anyways, there's a lot of different ways a lot of different things you need to do in order to bring a role-playing game to fruition. And there's a set amount of work that could be done without the other person there, but then the asynchronous communication slows things down. Mm-hmm. It's better if you could just look to the desk next to you and just say, hey, I got a quick question, So we're going to get an office so that we can both start commuting. In the middle of the U.S. Anyways, in the middle of some country, whatever that country is at the time of
recording, of release.
Of recording.
Yeah.
So anyways, the point is we got on the Discord and we did a couple hours of quiet work, and other people in the Discord joined us. It was great. It was good. I enjoyed the activity. I guess one of the reasons why I did like a whole lot of preface for this was just that like it's not a super talky time. We're just all hanging out. Like we're all doing our thing.
I mean, people are doing their day job or working on things. It is a good place to eavesdrop on the two of us because a lot of what we're doing is like, oh, hey, what about this? Like we're both working on a thing. And then it's like, oh, what about this? Bouncing an idea off or being like, oh, did you do this thing? Just like, boring stuff. So there's that. But yeah, it was nice. It's, I think, I'll speak for myself.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I am lacking is low-key social interaction, right?
Yeah.
Just being around people in a setting that is not for a thing. Weak social ties, right? Like just stuff that lets you know that you're a person in society. And so this is kind of nice to capture a little bit of like, oh yeah, we have like friends and compatriots and people in our spheres that like we're comfortable just kind of hanging out and catching up a little bit. Some people that I've only known online or people that I haven't seen since I left the Midwest, like that kind of stuff. So putting faces to names, like again, not a huge deal, but it was very nice. So we're gonna keep doing them.
Yeah, they'll be at random times. We'll put events down to let people know when a little ahead of time when we're going to do it. But we're following the coffee and game design principle.
Yes, yeah.
If Nathan and I could be there, it happens, and those are the only two scheduling concerns we make.
Right. Yeah, and if people can drop in, great. And if not, that's cool. We'll do a different one at a different time. This is all just happening on Discord, so hit our show notes or website for a link to the Discord. You do not need to be like a patron or anything. Anyone can join and check it out. And I'd say if there's a person or a couple people who would like to do a co-working hangout at a different time, there's no reason you can't
use the Discord. Yeah, no, there's no reason why you just do it.
We'll figure this out. I think one of us would have to make it an event, like a capital E event.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But you can ask us and we'll make an event for you. That's no problem. Past that, we've been having some good chats about the Groundhog Con and other things that have come out of that idea. There is a listener, friend of the show, Shannon, has a game to teach their mother about an RPG.
Yes, I hadn't had a chance to look at it yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, and also you added a new channel for workshopping.
Yeah.
For coming into the workshop for when you're working on something.
Yeah, we have a channel where you can talk about your works in progress. The main thing about our Discord is that we really don't want it to just be about the stuff we're doing. We want everyone to share the stuff that they're doing.
Our principle here is like we're not adding a channel until it feels like we need a channel.
Right.
So like, I think enough people have been either asking like, oh, I'm working on a thing, where should I post about that?
Yeah.
Or adding things that they're working on that it was like, oh, okay, well, let's go ahead and add in the workshop. The idea is that it's you're coming in, you're grabbing a table, other people are already working. You can work on your stuff. It is not a critical space, it is a community space.
Yeah, we're here to encourage, and if you want feedback, you have to explicitly ask for the kind of feedback other than that's a cool idea.
But it is a-okay to be like, hey, I'm working on this thing and I'm excited about it. And then we can all do all the, 100 emojis and fire and, give you votes of confidence because we also think it sounds cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Discord, we still have questions from the Discord that we promised that we would think about and come back with.
Mm-hmm.
I will say we did spend a decent amount of time on our homework. So I think in the interest of time, and also, again, it hasn't been that long for us since the last episode. So if you have thoughts or suggestions on places for finding games, we are still happy to hear those so we can talk about those all together at a future date. So we will spend the rest of our time in this episode, perhaps constrained by time.
Yes.
Talking about productive constraints.
Yeah. I think the question about where to find games is a good open question. We'll just keep asking it until we have like a good thing to talk about. But yeah, let's talk about these constraints. The question is, what have been your most productive constraints, either to constrain your design or to constrain the players during play? That is either constraints for writing the game or constraints written in the game. This is very good. I often think about games in terms of affordances and constraints. Right. Like, what does the game let me do? What does it try? And because a constraint, okay, so the word constraint just means like, hey, these are the barriers. These are the things you can't do or whatever. But it's a focusing principle. It's not a denying principle, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's impossible to, for instance, when we do this podcast, it's impossible to just sit and talk about all role-playing games ever all the time. So we have this constraint of the homework. We design this little system that like says, we're going to pick out a game that follows this pattern and we're going to just talk about that. I don't know why I felt like I should do like a one-on-one on constraints before we go into it.
In the last episode, kind of talked about like, we don't need to talk about why constraints are important, but yeah, it's all fake, right? Like this is all just like, there's no reason any of us can't do anything. So it's all constraints are resting on our agreement that we'll abide by them for these purposes. And so in a game, right, so the rules that you're writing, or your systems, your guidelines, your mechanics are, I'm gonna use a $10 phrase, are constraining the shared imagined space. Right. And it starts from the promise of the game, the premise, the idea. Mm-hmm. We're playing zombie cinema. It's going to be a game where there are zombies and it is like a movie. So thus the cinema, right? So then, yeah, when someone brings in like the aliens landing and saving us all and taking us to, Venus or something. Okay. Like if everyone's on board with that, sure, that's a story that can happen in that space. Mm-hmm. But the premise itself is already focusing down what everyone at the table feels is appropriate.
Right. And using the same example, like when I was talking about how the different spaces on the board tell you what's going on in the like the zombies, like they're rumors of zombies to start off with. Whereas like further on, they're like zombies have new powers. Those are nice constraints too. They're it's often misused, so I shouldn't use it at all because it doesn't. It's the exception that proves the rule, right? Like if a board space further up says zombies have new powers, that implies that they don't gain new powers before that space, right? Like there's constraints that come out of that.
So specifically, the question is, what have been our most productive constraints?
Right. I'm tempted to just talk in the abstract about things, like, because I do find when I sit down to do a thing and I'm like, oh, I'm not getting anywhere with it. If I step one meta zone back and write a game for doing the writing of the game, it helps, right? Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about Swords Without Master. Apologies.
If you weren't, I was going to, so.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to talk about the process of writing it, right? Mm-hmm. Swords Without Master had a few challenges in it that I had to like conquer. Like one of them is there's a certain constraint I couldn't put on it. This is for a constraint in play. Very specifically, Swords Without Master is a sword and sorcery game, and I don't want to get into a genre debate because everybody has their own definition of genre. However, the term sword and sorcery comes about, man, I might be telling lies here. From my understanding, the term sword and sorcery comes about before the social media, before the blogs. These were like letters in zines and things like that, where Michael Moorcock is like, I want a name for the genre that we do that isn't Tolkien. And Fritz Leiber is like, oh, yeah, I've been calling that sword and sorcery. So from that origin, we know one thing about sword and sorcery and one thing alone, and that it's not Tolkien. That's the extent of it. That's all and that these two dudes were really into it. Anyways, I don't want to go, like, it's a very open game. You could do anything, you can make any kind of character. Like, it's perfectly fine for you to sit down and make a robot that was running around with these barbarians and wizards and things like that. And I love that. But if you sat down and made a dwarf and someone else made an elf and somebody else made a hobbit, I would die inside. And I have to run this game at conventions quite a bit, right? Like I would die inside because I don't want to have to like talk you away from it. And that's a constraint that I couldn't put down on paper. I can't say no elves, no dwarves, because the moment I say that, you start thinking of a dwarf to play, right? Like you start thinking of a way around that. Sometimes that's what constraints do, is they're like, you can't go at it directly, let's figure a way around it. So I had to fill that game with all sorts of affordances that pointed as far away in other directions. And part of that was publishing a sword and sorcery magazine.
We're at to make an apple pie, you must first create the universe. Yes. Like to make a non-Tolkien game, you must first publish an entire magazine to describe what the game is about.
That fundamentally is what happened. And that's why it ended up in issue 3 of Worlds Without Master.
I'm thinking if there's something I want to say about Swords Without Master, and I mean I could say so many things about Swords Without Master, but again, in the interest of focusing, staying focused on this question, and I think I mentioned this in the last episode. One constraint that I've found very productive is time.
Yeah,
it doesn't do as much for me now, but especially in the early days, doing contest games, right, was a big thing that I would do. So this was early 2000s, Iron Game Chef, launched by Mike Holmes, and then, iterated through many versions, was a really productive place for a small group of people to have a focused way to make some games that were kind of not going to come out any other way, because those contests, inspired by Iron Chef, would give you a list of ingredients. And sometimes it would be a genre, or sometimes there'd be something just to kind of give like a little direction, right? So my Vietnam game, Carrie, came out of Iron Game Chef Historical. And the ingredients were Accuser, Companion, and something else that I don't recall. Anyway, there's like 4 words basically. So like, again, kind of famously, the Mountain Witch and Polaris both came out of an Iron Game Chef, where the words were snow, mountain, dawn, and something else. Write a game, submit it by this time, which was usually like 2 weeks or something like that. And then there was a round of judging, which was in good spirit, right? This was all meant to be a productive thing. And it worked when there's a small scale of people.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's a big game jam culture on itch. So like,
So this is distinct from a jam, I think. I think jams are more sustainable than contests.
Right.
So anyway, so having those particular outside constraints, right? Here's your theme, here's your ingredients. You have to use, like, these words need to appear in the entry. You will be judged, like Iron Chef, you will be judged higher, like you will do better in the judgment if your ingredients are better incorporated and more creatively used. But if you're just sprinkling a little bit of Accuser on top of something that is not very, that doesn't do a whole lot of other things, that's not going to be judged as well. Yeah, and so that drove the design of that game in a really fundamental way. I found that productive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that people find that I have bounced very hard off of that kind of thing in the past.
Also, to be very clear, I was finishing college.
Right. Yeah.
And it happened during the end of finals into commencement time. I had the time and the energy, like, whatever. For me personally, it was, it hit at a good time. It is harder to do those things, when you have more adult commitments.
Right. Yeah. I know a lot of people really enjoy contests and jams, and they do they're very helpful for them. Not just in role playing, but like all around. I tried NaNoWriMo, and I was like, not me, not my thing. But I'm not trying to poo-poo it. I'm just saying it's constraints work for different ways for different people. Yeah.
The other time constraint I was going to say that might be a little more applicable is getting a draft together in time for a playtest.
Yes. Oh, that is very motivating.
That is a very productive constraint. Usually, either for like a convention or whether it's a home playtest or whatever, but being like, all right, this is on my calendar. I've committed to being able to run this game on this day. What do I have? And what do I need to fulfill that commitment in a minimally viable way, right? Like, what are the minimum things I need to do so that I know that this will be a good use of my time when I bring it to the table?
There's a certain anesthesia that goes on there where you do it. Sometimes it is hell getting it like under that constraint, and then later on you put yourself under the same constraint again because you completely forgot, because either the play test went well or like something. It's one of those things that's like you're in a heightened state during it, so you forget all the effects it had on you. But yeah, it's super productive. Just having a deadline like that where it's not a promise to yourself, it's a promise to other people. It's everyone
understands if you show up and you're like, all right, I didn't get to where I wanted to be, so here's what I have. Like, that's fine.
Playtests are almost always easier than what you're imagining before you go into them. Like, they're gentler, I should say. The
clarifying part of it is prioritizing what do I actually need, right? Like, that's why it's productive. It's like, what do I actually need for this? Not to either. So like right now for the Dark Fate fantasy game I'm working on, what I actually need for the next time I playtest is not a bunch of character stuff, because like the character, like the playbooks, like they're fine. They need work, but they don't need work in order to advance the state of the game as a package. What I need to do to advance the state of the game is a lot of the GM facing stuff and the kind of like conceptual basis of how like the world works. So like I need to spend my time on that and not spend my time on sharpening up the descriptions of character powers.
Yes.
I don't have anything scheduled right now, so I'm not doing any of that because I'm working on other things. But if I'm like, okay, in a week I'm running this, that gives me my priority list for what to actually work on.
Yes. Going back to the question itself, thinking about productive constraints. Like, first of all, I want to like not examine the word productive, but just like say, when it comes to game design, a game that does not get published is still productive in my head. I just want to like put that, like, anytime I'm designing a game, my current game is always the result of all of the failed games that came before it.
Right.
That said, maybe the most fruitful constraint I have ever experienced, and this is just because of the privileged position I'm in, was when talking with at the time my roommate Nat Barmore about the problem with games is that there's too many numbers. We should make a game without numbers, and then ended up with a Jenga-based horror game. I can't talk about design constraints without mentioning that one, because we wouldn't be having this chat if that didn't happen. Or I shouldn't say we wouldn't be, but it's very unlikely that I'd be married who I'd be married to. Like, it was a very important constraint in my life, and one I don't agree with, obviously. Like, it was important at the moment because it gave us a chance to like look at games a different way. We said, let's do everything we can without numbers, and then we were looking at these polyhedrons covered in numbers, and we were like, we can't rely on these anymore. What else is there? And also, it's important to note that like there's a lot of math that goes into Jenga. And then part of the question asked like constraints in games. Apocalypse World's read a situation changed how I looked at things. And I honestly can't remember how Apocalypse World's original read a situation worked, but essentially it was like you're rolling to notice the world,
right? And you get a list of questions that you can.
You get a list of questions that you
ask.
And
the questions are prescribed. So the questions are like, what is threatening me here? What am I not aware of? Like, there's 3 or 4 juicy leading questions, and they nail the genre. You're like, these are the things I care about, and I have focused on that in a lot of my designs since then. A lot of stuff that never saw the light of day, but like the core of Wolfspell is that. Right.
You're rolling to see if you have the questions that a human might have, or if you have the questions that a wolf might have. It's a very, very productive way to just say, you're allowed to notice everything, but like it's through these concerns, it's through these lenses.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I think you mentioned it in the last one, but it's worth going on about again for sure. Let's each pick a piece of our game design that we've put in a game that is about constraining play.
Right.
That's been really good.
Yeah.
Like let's celebrate a little bit. I have a thought for mine.
Go for it. You go first then.
So like I said, the entire process of game design is adding layers and layers of what not to do, what not to say. In order to focus this game experience, right? Either explicitly or by implication. Something I'm still very happy with is how resolution works in Annalise. which is built on Otherkind, which is another Vincent Baker joint.
Yeah.
So
we're products of our culture.
We're products of our culture. And so it's based off of Otherkind dice, which is kind of a mechanic for a game called Otherkind that ended up, I think, turning into Apocalypse World. But anyway, I could be wrong about that.
Its most direct successor might be Cyron.
Yeah. Cyron, yeah. Anyway, so how it works in Annalise is you're playing out your scenes, and then you get to what's called a moment. And a moment is like, it's the time when all of us at the table go, something's going to happen now. You know, it's when you reach for the dice in Swords Without Master. It's like, this is the time. A thing needs to happen. So it's just called a moment. You have some traits on your sheet that you're rolling from. And you're getting a number of dice. You're rolling 6-siders, and you're going to roll a pool of them, and you're going to have numbers. Now, before you roll, you and the scene guide, the GM for that scene, each forecast a thing that could happen out of this. And the important thing is that they need to be orthogonal. Everything that's introduced into the moment has to be something that could happen independently of whether anything else happens. Right. If I'm introducing that my plea to a higher power is answered and I'm, filled with divine favor, your thing can't be like God abandons you or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
It could be something like the vampire creature is filled with divine favor. Like,
right.
How do you like that? Right. Like, these two things could both happen. And then you roll dice and you assign them to these potential outcomes. And so the dice tell you what happens. You get to assign them, and then there's mechanics about people use claims to change the size of the dice, to change it from happening to not happening, or happening with a caveat or whatever. And you end up being like, okay, this thing happens, but with, some kind of caveat to it, and this thing doesn't happen. And then you need to work out, okay, so we went into the moment, we roll dice, we see what's going to happen, and then we have to synthesize those outcomes into, and here's what we see, right?
Right, yeah.
The constraint there is that the need for orthogonal things. And that creates negotiation in that moment of people when they're coming up with their outcomes, right? And there's a layer of player interaction there where sometimes you need to bounce ideas off of each other so that everything will qualify before you roll the dice. And that moment actually is the juice.
Right. Yeah. That's where things get generated. That's where ideas are made.
Exactly. And so rhythmically what happens is like play. Something has to happen. And then everyone thinks about it really hard.
Yeah.
And then you roll some dice and you see what happens and you play. And so it creates a rhythm of like in world, out of world, in character, out of character that I think is also important to that. Anyway, I'm waxing on, but
that's good stuff.
That's a point where on paper, it feels like that should be a friction, right? That feels like, and then we have to do all this stuff. But in play, it's actually really engaging because you start thinking as a player, it makes you start thinking about foreshadowing and you start thinking about what already happened.
Right. Yeah.
So you get to throw in little bits of your own inspiration, and then it gets all mixed together by the dice. So I'm pretty happy with that, and that is a constraint on players.
That's good stuff. That is good stuff. Yeah, I'd forgotten. I mean, I really enjoyed that game, and obviously, it's it's part of why Swords Without Master exists. We're in a conversation here, and it's taken decades. And hopefully, we'll keep going for a couple hours more, at least,
until our next co-working hangout. Hopefully,
yeah. So, one that I'm playing with right now that I quite like goes all the way back to Dread, and it's one that sometimes I notice that people forget about it, which is, I'm not blaming, this isn't about you're playing it wrong if you're not doing this or whatever. It just makes me a little sad when people don't do it. And that's in Dread, when if the host is telling you to draw more than one block, each of those have to be a thing, right? If you're trying to get out of you're trapped in the sewer and you have come to this spot where there's the bars that the sewer has or whatever, and they're rusty and whatnot. I'm like, all right, you're going to have to make 3 pulls, and 1 is to be able to pull that, and 2 is to be able to, if you do that without cutting yourself, and 3 is to get it done in time to get, like, each one is a thing. I can't just say it takes 3 pulls to do it. Each has to relate to something so you can make a decision in the story, like, I need to get it done. I need to get it on in time. It's fine if my hands get all scraped up and I get an infection. We'll deal with that after the guy with the axe is chasing us, stops chasing us or whatever. And like I said, I've seen, actual plays where people are just like, oh, it just costs 3 pulls to do it. And
it's like difficulty 3. And it's like,
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, it's fine. But you there's a little magic there that you're missing, and a little but again, like, I don't want to tell, even for my own games, I don't want to be like, you're playing it wrong or anything like that. And like, it may not be important to you, in that moment to have those kind of concerns.
But the idea of it being a productive constraint, right, is that those moments are more productive for your story if you do follow that rule.
Yeah. And so in one of my current works of progress, I have misery that I hand out, and it's 1 point at a time, and each point has to be a thing. And often, like, the misery that you get handed out is about, like, a lot of times it's over land travel. Like, you spend the morning going from point A to point B, and it's uphill, so that's 1 point. It's hot, that's another point. And you're all hungry because you didn't have breakfast. That's the 3rd point. And then that allows people to be like, an example from a recent playtest is one of the characters is a pixie and just rides on the dog's back the whole time. It was like, okay, that's fine. You don't have to worry about it being, uphill because the dog is worrying about it, that kind of thing.
You're making the dog miserable. How does that make you feel?
You're making the dogs. Yeah. But like, the fact that each has to be a thing, I can't just say you marched all morning and take 4 misery, right? Like, I have to tell you what those different, and like, in this game, I can even say it's a 4 misery march. You tell me what those are.
Sure.
And they could be like, I stubbed my toe. I did, in this particular case, if I did that with this group, whereas 7 players, I would end up with 28 responses, and I wouldn't do that. I would be more like, here's the 3, and then you tell me what your 4th is, or something like that. But it's a nice constraint. It's a nice way of just saying, it's both an in-game constraint, but it's also a design constraint from my point of view, right? Because then I can't design a game that requires 50 pulls from the Jenga tower, like, take 100 misery, because like, nobody's going to sit and list 100 things. I know that sounds obvious, but sometimes it's not obvious when you're designing a game. Again, when we first made Dread, the first edition of Dread had the same questionnaire for every character, and there were over 100 questions on that questionnaire. There was the most ridiculous idea I've ever had for a role-playing game. Who would do that? Like, why would you sit down? I mean, like, no, I shouldn't say that. There are people out there who would do that, but like, who would love 100 questionnaire about their characters. But
it makes it hard for you to run it for 1,000 people at conventions.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. That is a good question, though. Obviously, our answers are nowhere near exhaustive.
Right.
Like, yeah, pop in the Discord. Tell us about constraints that you've enjoyed and found productive in your games or game design. That'd be great.
We are constrained by the ever ongoing march of time. It's time for us to bid you, fair listeners, farewell for this episode of the Unwritten Earth Symposium podcast. I think we already mentioned, but yeah, if you have any recommendations or stories about finding games, still send those our way.
Oh, yeah.
All of our contact info is on the website at unwrittenearths.com, including the link to the Discord, link to our email, link to the Patreon, where you also will get to hear the our second show, Plus Expenses, which we're going to go record as soon as we're done with this show. The Unwritten Earth Symposium podcast is by us. Go us. Our music is by Will Yobst, who you can find at braintrust.rocks and will.com as per usual. Yeah.
Those are our credits.
Those are our credits. Keep an eye out. By the time this comes out or shortly thereafter, we will have some news about the annual. So it may already be on our website. I don't know, but
it is.
Very good. It's already on the website. You can check out what we have to say about that so far. I'm not being intentionally coy. I just don't know exactly how our timing is going to line up, but we will be doing some crowdfunding for our first edition for our first annual, and that's coming up soon. So we'll have more about that on the show probably in our next couple episodes. So even though we have been working on the annual, I'm not sure if it really counts for our traditional question. Epi, have we made a game yet?
I mean, not yet.
Maybe next time.
Yeah.